This presentation is on Tarsila do Amaral. Tarsila do Amaral is a Brazilian artist. She was born on September 1st, 1886. She was born in Capivari, a small town in the Brazilian state of São Paulo. Her father, José do Amaral, came from a family of prosperous landowners and grew coffee in his plantation. Tarsila was born second of 5 children. At a time when daughters of rich families mostly stayed at home learning little, she was supported by her parents in her effort to educate herself. Here's a picture of her with 2 of her younger siblings. In 1900, the family moved from Barcelona, where she was enrolled in a school. It was at this school that she had her first formal instruction in art. Very soon, she impressed her teachers with her copies of images from the school's collection. In 1906, the family returned to São Paulo. By then, Tarsila was immersed in her studies of art. She began exploring sculpture in 1916 and then painting in 1917. After visiting another artist, Anita Malfatti's exhibition, Tarsila's interest in modernism began. Malfatti was the first Brazilian artist to introduce European and American modernism to Brazil and was criticized by most Brazilians because of her work. In 1922, after studying a year in Paris and returning to Brazil, she met some artists and together formed a group called Grupo dos Cinco, or the Group of Five. The group's main intention was to promote Brazilian culture through modern art, avoiding styles that were typically European. Instead, they tried to include elements indigenous to Brazil. In December 1922, Tarsila returned to Paris. She studied briefly with Ferdinand Legger, during which she was exposed to different types of modern art, including Cubism. Although Cubism had its benefits helping artists, it would prove destructive. Therefore, while she did not give up Cubism, she fought to evolve a style of her own, being influenced greatly by Ferdinand Legger in the process. For inspiration, she now began to delve into Brazilian ethnic culture. In a letter to her parents during this period, she had explained how her experiences in Paris had inspired her to explore her roots in her Brazilian heritage and how she wanted to be known as a Brazilian painter. In 1923, she created her famous painting, A Negra, meaning the black woman. It was an exaggerated and flattened portrait of a nude Afro-Brazilian woman set against a geometric background. It marked the beginning of her unique style, highlighting a synthesis of avant-garde aesthetics and Brazilian ethnicity. After she returned to Brazil in 1923, she was delighted to rediscover the vibrant colors she loved as a child, but later was taught to reject as ugly and unsophisticated. Furthermore, the rustic homes and old churches captured her imagination. Delving more deeply into her Brazilian heritage, slowly she began to discover her roots. During her travels, Tarsila made many sketches which later became the basis of many of her paintings. The colors were always vibrant, something she rediscovered during this tour. She also developed an interest in industrialization and its impact on Brazilian society. Estrada de Ferro Central do Brasil was Tarsila's first major work of this period. Created in vibrant colors, the cityscape was a wonderful fusion of Cubism and ethnic paintings. Clinging to her roots, Tarsila continued to portray Brazilian landscape as well as imagery through her paintings. In 1926, after marriage to Oswald de Andrade, they moved to Europe, holding her first exhibition in Paris, where her use of bold colors and tropical images was highly praised. In Paris, Tarsila was exposed to Surrealism. On her return to Brazil after a tour of Europe and the Middle East, she embarked on a new period in her paintings. Departing from her earlier style of portraying sceneries and cityscapes, she began to incorporate Surrealism in her paintings. By then, a new movement depicting Brazil as a country of big snakes had started in different parts of Brazil, especially in Sao Paulo. The movement, based on earlier Pau-Brasil movement, aimed at appropriating European style and influences to create a unique Brazilian style. In 1928, Tarsila created her famous work Abaporu, depicting a man, the sun, and a cactus. It inspired Andrade, her husband at the time, to write the Anthropophagite Manifesto, which gave rise to the anthropophagic movement. Tarsila is best remembered for her 1928 painting Apaporu, literally meaning man-eat people. She created it as a birthday present for Oswald de Andrade. It inspired him to start the anthropophagic movement that encouraged Brazilian artists to swallow European culture, turning it into something fully Brazilian. Anthropophagia, created in 1929, was another of her major works of this period. In the same year, she had her first solo exhibition in Brazil and Rio de Janeiro, and another solo exhibition in Sao Paulo. By 1930, she had become internationally famous, and her works were being shown at exhibitions in New York and Paris. Around 1931, Tarsila traveled throughout the USSR and was affected by the poverty she witnessed and by the social realist paintings she saw. In 1932, she returned to Brazil, socially more active, becoming involved in the constitutionalist revolution that broke out in July. Because of her visit to the Soviet Union, she was taken as a communist sympathizer and was imprisoned for a month. For the next 2 decades, her work continued to convey social issues, many of which featured recognizable human figures. In 1938, Tarsila settled down permanently in Sao Paulo, painting Brazilian people and sceneries. In the 1950s, she returned to her semi-cubic style, still depicting Brazilian landscape and imagery. Towards the end of her life, Tarsila suffered from severe back problems, which confined her to a wheelchair. She died on January 17, 1976, at the age of 86 in Sao Paulo. She left hundreds of artworks, but more importantly, she led the Brazilian arts into modernism and helped to develop a unique style that was indigenously Brazilian.